can. So just to review, so the idea, right, this is our Athena that we're going to set up. And the idea is, okay, we're going to upload some data to an S3 bucket. And this is just a static file, right? There's nothing, we can't really do too much with it in the S3, or we can't actually use S3 to do too much with it except set permissions, things like that. So we'll use this other resource called Athena, which can query it. But in order to query it, it's still we still need to store some information about the schema, like what columns and the data types. And to do that, we'll use this service called Glue, which can look at our files in the bucket, and from there generate a table for us. All right, it will create columns. Or the ability to access our data as columns. So we'll use Glue to crawl our bucket and to crawl the data, the files inside the bucket. Yeah, can I Slack this image? Sure. So, yeah, I'm gonna try. I've run into issues with Athena before, so let's just hope that it doesn't happen really here, but we'll see. One thing, I think the main thing to know about Athena is there's two different buckets that you use with Athena. One is to query the data, right? We're going to upload a CSV file and then query the data, use Athena to query the data. Athena will then store those results in a second bucket, okay? So you're gonna access it, and then Athena will just directly store the results in our results bucket and in a file in the results bucket. So each query will be stored in a different file. Okay? And if you want to see what those results are, what you'll have to do is access it from the file. So I think that's the main thing, conceptually, to understand. Is we have the input data, a bucket for inputs, and a bucket for outputs. All right? Okay, let's try this. So I'm going to, you can see I have this bucket for outputs, Jigsaw Texas results, and I've already used it. I'm going to create a new bucket for inputs, a lecture, Jigsaw, Athena. And I think the settings are fine. All the default settings are fine. It's not publicly accessible. It's only accessible. And I just have to make sure the region, this is the only thing I think you have to be careful about, is that the region is consistent with Athena. All right, so this is US East 1, and I'll make sure that Athena is also US East 1. And then we'll do lecture Jigsaw Athena. So this is a bucket for my input data. So let's store some input data here. So for this, I have this CSV file. This is just data from that API. All right, you can see that. So let's store this in the bucket. So to do that, we'll do open dot, and then we'll drag and drop this here, and then we'll click upload. And then I'll just make sure. Yeah, so it's there. Okay, so this is our input data and our input bucket. And I suppose that's fine. We'll use, I'll just create an output. No, you know what? We'll use this, I have this results, Jigsaw Texas results as my output bucket. So that's fine. And now let's go to Athena. So I'll just start over. I'll just type in Athena. All right, and you can see I've already created some databases here. I don't know if it will prompt you to create one if it hasn't existed, but what I'll do is I'm choosing this database. It doesn't seem like it has any tables associated with it. All right, so this concept of a database is a little confusing. If it's confusing me, it's a little confusing to me. I think the idea is that you can think of your S3 buckets as kind of like various tables, right? And so if you thought of them as tables, there's also, why not have this idea of a database, so that we can have multiple tables in a database? And that's this lake formation. But you see, AWS Lake Formation easily creates and secures data lakes, making data wide available, available for ranging analytics. And it seems like it allows you to basically add permission. I haven't really used this, but it seems like it allows you to like add permissions, as if to a data lake, to this kind of entity, this wrapper, or like this folder, to like a series of S3 buckets, like you would to a database, right? Make data silos, make all data discoverable within a centralized data catalog. So just like we could, if we were logging into Postgres and connecting to a database, we could display all the tables. Well, if they're spread across these various S3 buckets, that's harder to do, to figure what is the grouping of these tables. So I think that's what this lake formation service does. And you can see that here, right? That it's asking us to create like a database. And now in that database, let's create a table. So we can create it directly from S3 bucket data, but that means that, we would need to specify the schema of that data. Instead, we can use the Glue crawler to look at our CSV file and then say, okay, this should be called this column name and of this data type. So that's what we'll do. Let's call this my lecture crawler. We'll give it a name. Click next. Is your data already mapped to Glue tables? No. Then we'll do add a data source. We can see, we should be able to browse the buckets. Mine was something about a lecture. There we go. Lecture Jigsaw Athena. We'll choose that. And now look, it's already giving me a red mark. That's very nice because it wants me to put the slash so that this specifies like all the files inside of the bucket will be crawled. Okay? And it will crawl all subfolders, and that's fine, right? So we could specify, just a subset of the files, but we're not going to. Network connection, seems like we don't need that. Choose a source of data to be crawled. That's S3. That makes sense. And now let's click Add S3 Data Source. So this is the input data, right? And remember that this input data has that CSV file that I uploaded. All right. Now we'll click Next and we'll move on to the security settings. Here we'll have to create a new IAM role, I believe. And we'll just give it a name. We'll give it like Lecture Athena. Click Create. And now you can view that role. You can view the role that it created for us. So it kind of knows, hey, we're about to use S3. We're going to need to get access to S3. We're going to have to give Glue access to S3. So we need, permissions to do that. So these are the permissions. If you click on this View button, right, in a new page, you can view the permissions that we gave access to. So here, I think this is the most relevant one. You can start to see, okay, it's giving get object and actually I don't need put object permissions to my input data. I don't know why it needs the put object permissions, but it's doing it. And you can see, right, like here's the resource and then here's the get object. So allow the ability to read my input data. This is the other one is like more complicated. This is like a bunch of other stuff that it's doing. This is harder to understand. But you can see, right, it's giving a nice description. It will be used for the Glue crawler to access S3. All right, so that's that. We don't want to edit this. The defaults are fine, right? So what we've done now is we've attached this IAM role to the Athena service so that it can access S3. Oh, put for writing the results. Thank you. All right. So now allow the crawler to use lake formation credentials for crawling the data source. I forget if I normally check this or not. I think I'm okay. I'll just try it without it. All right. And now this is the target database. So again, so we have to specify like the database that this table or like that this schema will be stored in. So you can see that you can create one, right, and store it there. Let's create one. So what I did was I just clicked this pop out thing for add a database, and I'll call this lecture DB. All right, and then click create database. And now, so you can see this is listed here. And now if I refresh the list over here, I should see lecture DB. So I see that. And now we have how often I want to crawl this. So you can crawl this, you can see, you can set it on a schedule. Like say you update the data and maybe the schema changes because of that. But I'll just do on demand because we just need to crawl it once. And then here's the results, right? Review and create. So this is the name is the lecture crawler. The type of data that we're crawling is S3 from my input bucket. Here's the security settings, right? That this gives access to read and write to this bucket. And then the output, I guess, is this lecture database. And we'll create the crawler. Oh, beautiful, it worked. Okay, so it says the following crawler is now created lecture crawler. All right. I have not run the crawler. I think I probably have to do that. Let's do that. Okay. So this thing is now running. In other words, right, it's going through this, it doesn't say, that, but the S3 bucket, looking at the data and then creating a schema from that. And eventually, I think from here I can go, when this is done, I should be able to go back to Athena, I believe. Let's go to Athena. And I guess I can refresh this list. Here's my lecture database. There's no tables here yet, right? Which probably means this crawler has not finished yet. It's still running. But the only thing I missed, okay, so this is now finished. The only thing I missed was like right that output bucket. That is stored in Athena's settings. You should see like a blue pop-up right when you do that. I guess in the settings, you can see here's the query result location, right? So this is where the results will be stored. I have that set, and I can change that, I'm assuming. All right. So here's my editor. This is the lecture DB. And look, here you can see the table, I suppose, was created. This is pretty cool. Okay. So maybe I can just... Yeah, okay. So the table name, I was getting confused for a second. The table name, this is just directly my S3 bucket name. All right. So it just looked at this bucket. What was it called? Sorry. I apologize. Okay, so it looked at lecture jigsaw Athena. That was my bucket name, and it created a table from it. All right. So now I can do select all from lecture jigsaw Athena, limit 3, and let's do run. And these are the results. Okay. So why is something like this nice, right? We're paying per transaction. We're not having this thing running overnight because the only thing that's being stored, right, overnight, the only thing that's being used is S3. We just pay every time I run Athena. We also paid for crawling glue, but we're only doing what once, and we don't have to really do it again. So, this can be very useful for just doing initial exploration of data. You can like search logs, for example, with this. If you're not quite sure what the data looks like, right, you can do this. The other thing you can the other thing you can do is, sorry for switching tabs so much. The other thing that you can do is say we only need a subset of the data, right? Like we pull all this data from an API. Maybe what we need is only, select the relevant receipts, those that are, say those that are over $1,000 or whatever, let's select them and just load those into my database, right? That way we don't have to pay so much for Redshift or et cetera. We can keep that small because we're just loading a subset of the data into there, right? So this can be pretty nice for something like that. We should see the results, I guess, in the result bucket. Let's take a look. My guess is, I'm not sure if it's stored in output, but it would be stored somewhere here. Let's see. You know what? I just flew too close to the sun. I'm not sure. Maybe it's here. Oh, here it is. May 30th. Seems like this is the query. And then if you download this file, you can see these are those 3 results that we saw. So it's stored it by default, right, in our bucket, I guess under this unsaved folder. I don't know why that. And then it did it by date. All right. And this may seem like a pain to be able to access this, but we're going to be able to use Boto 3 to be able to access the query results. And so it won't end up being that difficult once we do use Python to do this.
You can download from the Athena user interface like directly too. I did it a lot. So from Athena, if you go down, and then you just hit download results. That's like a quick way.
And you can see it's actually linking directly. I don't know if you all can see that, but it's linking to that S3 link, Jigsaw Texas Results Unsaved 2023, etc. So it's linking, giving you the link directly to that file, which is pretty cool. All right. Okay, so yeah, just to review, right? We set up our input bucket. We uploaded some CSV there. We then used Glue to crawl this bucket, and this data lake thing is really just a wrapper. It's really just like a folder, a way of organizing a series of buckets. That way we can think of these these buckets like a table, like a collection of tables stored in a database. So anyway, we're using Glue. I wish I didn't do that. We're using Glue to crawl our bucket and determine the schema. Then we're giving a Glue. We had to give Glue permission to this bucket, right? And Athena, after we crawled this thing, we then were able to query our bucket, right, as a table. The table name was just the name of the bucket. And then the results were automatically stored in our output bucket, which we specified right in the settings. Sorry, this is Glue. This is Glue. One of these is Athena. This is Athena, right? And we specified our output bucket over here. And the use case, there's good uses for this, but if you have some unstructured data you're not quite sure about, if you only really need a subset of your data, which sounds pretty practical, that you want to store in, say, a data warehouse, something like Redshift, which does cost more money, right? We can filter for a subset of the data directly here and then load that, that data that's stored in the output bucket into Redshift, right? Into something more costly. So we're able to really manage how much data is in our kind of cool. Like a more costly resource. If you look at, and I wrote out some code for you all to work through, so I think it's pretty clear. But
so those permissions that you said were for AWS Glue, not for AWS Athena, correct?
That's correct. Okay, and then I can call something like get the current user. Like who am I logged in? I guess Athena. Boto. And then we can have to look at the username for Athena that it was, and then we can list the policies of that. Either it might be the fact that Athena has access to the database, to like the data lake, and the data lake has access to S3 as to why it could, just directly access. I must have messed something up. Right, I'd have to. So you can see unable to parse the file in .aws. But yeah, I did not. I don't think I had to mess with any permissions with Athena. Let's see if there's an answer. One powerful use of Athena is also to query multiple data sources. You should relog. You should exit out of Boto and like RDS and
So let me just
S3
run this again.
together. Query. Yeah. So this
do you
is
wanna
now
expand
on that, Taylor? So you can see.
Oh yeah, just like you could create multiple data sources,
You know, and
there,
it's super
and you can
important
refer to
that
them
you,
all,
like remember
like
all of this.
AWS
I just want to show you.
catalog,
Okay, I'm able to
such
get the
stuff.
user,
And then you
I
could
can
do
see
a query
hey,
that,
currently I'm
maybe
logged
queries a
in.
SQL
The username
database
is
that you
this
created, and
actual
also
user,
S3,
right, that we're now
and you can
logged
join
in,
a lot
right?
of
And I
different
did this
data
by
sources
putting
together in a
the
single
credentials
result
file.
set. So it's kind of like a data warehousing tool where
And
it
then
brings
the
a
thing
lot of
that
things
will,
together, not just S3.
I
You
think
could
you
query
can go
a
through
lot
this
of
in the
different
code
things.
along, but
That's
what you'll
pretty cool,
see
right?
is,
So I can,
you know,
I can have
because
some data that's stored
we only have read-only
and now I got a
access,
new
right?
set
If you
of
try to
data
do something in
like,
S,
and I
you know,
wanna,
create a bucket,
link them.
hold
It
on,
seems
let's,
like we're able
let's
to
actually
do that,
import.
with
So we'll
Athena.
import the S3 client,
So that's pretty cool.
and then we'll do
Anything else?
S3 create
Taylor,
a bucket.
Anything else that I missed?
You'll see that this is working properly.
Use cases
in that
or other features to add.
we have this access to
I like to use the
Normally
views a
we
lot,
don't get an access to
or
that,
just creating a
bucket, but
query
because we only have read-only
and
access,
saving it, so you can go to
you know,
create
that's
and then
denied.
add a view,
However,
and it'll
we
just
can do
store,
something like,
you know,
say,
maybe it's kind of a
list
long
the
query that
objects
you always
in
want
one
to
of my
run.
buckets, right?
That
Because it's
does
read-only.
joins, you could do that.
So that's kind of one thing to
Another
see.
thing is that when you have
And again, this
an
is that
S3
permission
folder that you
slip
crawl,
of
and
adding
within that S3 folder,
policies
it's got a bunch of subfolders.
on a particular user.
Those are called partitions in Athena.
Another thing, though,
and you can like
is
do a where clause
on
on
the
the partition,
S3
so you can say
bucket
like
itself.
where
So if you
subfolder
go
equals
type in
this.
S3,
Oh,
Or
that's
something.
pretty cool. That I did not
Yeah.
realize that. Okay,
See.
so
you can
so
you
right,
can
so
see
we can,
I have these different ones.
So one thing we could do is just query, data in a
objects
particular
can
folder.
be
What would be
public. I
useful
think
about
it's this one
is
What I did was,
switching tabs
if you go to permissions,
what would be useful
see,
about this?
here
is,
I
like,
added
say,
a
like,
statement
when we upload our data, like we hit
directly
an API, we upload
onto the
data
bucket.
to
Okay.
S3.
So
say we store
let's
it by
try to
date.
understand this.
So now,
so again,
we can just query
this
our most
is
recent data.
this looks very
to see if there's
similar.
anything
It is
weird
very
about
similar
it
to
before we load it into our
what we
database,
saw on the
something
user.
like that.
We have version and statement.
so
These are the
how
two
would I do
outermost
something?
keys.
Do
So
you
this is
know
the
how-
API.
When you run the crawler and you
This is
say
really
crawl
the
all
list of
subfolders, if you
dictionaries
have any
for the
subfolders, you'll
statement.
get
There's
a
only
new
one
field
dictionary
in your
field.
table called
We could have
partition,
done one.
and that will
SID
be a
is the
string
statement ID.
indicating
This
the
is just any
subfolder
text you
name.
want.
You might actually have it now if you
And then
go to
again,
your
we have the
table,
select.
lecture.athena, and scroll all the way down. It might
The
just be
principle
there,
is
like,
who am I
okay, it's on there.
allowing
Yeah, if you got
access to?
subfolders, it'll
Right,
automatically
so remember, this is
create
that
a new
bouncer
field that
right,
you can
at
like
the
do a
door,
where clause on.
specifying the
So we
list
get a
of
new
who is
column
allowed
called
access.
partition, and
So
then I can
here,
say,
I'm
like, where
only
partition
allowing,
equals,
this
May,
user
Right.
May
these
2023,
abilities.
right? As opposed
Right,
to
this
where
only
partition
applies
was
to
June
this
2023.
particular user. So I'm
Right, so I
allowing
can
the
just
user
select for
this
data
IAM user,
in that folder, in that
the ability to
partition.
create objects. Put object is really creating an object,
Inside that folder. So anyway,
and
like I
then
said,
retrieving an
that seems very
object and
useful
deleting an
because
object.
We can
All right, so
just,
these are the
we can
actions I'm
simply,
allowing, and then I think this is a little
query
silly,
our
but
most
or
recent
maybe I
data,
just don't fully
and then do
understand it.
something
I guess
with that.
it's not so
Decide,
silly.
okay,
You have
of
to
this
put
most
it in the
recent data,
resource.
This
Right,
is
you have to
the
specify,
interesting one. This is the one that has receipts over
this is the
$5,000. That's most
ARN,
recent. I wanna take
meaning
that
the
data,
Amazon
load it
resource
into,
number of what this applies to.
Redshift, or I wanna
So
take
this
that data,
is
clean it,
where. How do I get
load
this
it into
thing?
Redshift, something like that.
It's just if you go to.
Cool.
How do you go?
All right.
It
So yeah.
should
So
be-
this is the next step.
Normally it's right. If I go to edit, I think it will be. See that they provide it for you directly. So they say, hey, you're probably going to need this thing. This is the Amazon resource number of the current bucket. Okay. So you can see it always begins like ARN, AWS, the service that you're talking, the resource you're talking about, and then the specific identifier for it. The reason why they make you provide it is because you can provide just access to the bucket itself, or all bucket itself and all the objects in the bucket. So this is applying, because you see the /* at the end, this is saying, hey, this applies to all the objects in the bucket. We're allowing, us the ability to get those objects themselves, not just the container, the bucket. We're also allowing access to the objects. All right, so that's kind of the idea here. It can be a pain in the neck to write out these things, as you might imagine. One thing to know is that there is this policy generator, which is pretty nice. Okay, so if you go to the policy generator, and then you can specify different kinds of policies that you want to write. So for instance, here's the S3 bucket policy. Who is the principal? Again, the principal is going to be By the principal, we mean who is the user that you want to allow this access to? Is it anyone, or that you want this a statement to apply to? Does it apply to anyone? Does it apply to just this guy? So here we'll just have it apply to this user. And then this is for the AWS service. It knows that because of this bucket policy. And then we can specify, okay, what are the abilities we're going to give them? So just to like generate it, I'll say create the bucket policy and say delete a bucket. And then what Amazon resource does this apply to? Let's copy this guy and paste this in here. All right. Remember, we can add multiple statements to a single policy. Like we could, say we have a policy of, creating buckets and then a separate statement for creating objects or whatever. Then let's click add the statement. And then finally, we can generate the policy. And you see this? Here it displays, right? It's created that JSON for me, which makes my life easier at least, right? But the idea is hopefully you can start reading this thing and understanding it. The reason why I go through this, why do I go through this? Because when you have problems with AWS, it's oftentimes problems with permissions, right? So taking an hour to understand this stuff or more, right, is going to save you a ton of time as you work with AWS. All right, so that's what these next code alongs are doing, is taking you through this and exploring a little bit more detailed about kind of, this bouncer analogy, right, of putting permissions on the bucket itself, and then also the permission slip analogy of, as a user, what access do you have? I know. Questions? Yeah, it's going to take some time. And it's not, even then, you'll be a little bit confused probably, but it will be less confused. I think you'll be able to understand the logic of all of the rest of the setup you have to do in the coming days with permissions.
So if we work in a company, or those access, do we get permitted or we create for other people?
If you can, like, as a account owner, you can create other users there. I think like you can create other users for members of your organization, and that's probably what people will do, is they'll create certain abilities for you. I'm not sure. I guess different organizations will set it up differently. The other thing I think you can do is, like, say I log in, you can still connect to a third kind of organization, the same as like you log in as your GitHub user, but say you get permissions from an organization type of thing. Yeah. Did that answer your question or not really? I don't know. Taylor, how does it, if you're there, how did it work in your organization? Did they like assign you, I guess, a user and certain permissions?
Yeah, we'd have like an admin who made sure that you only had the certain amount of permissions that would be expected for a service that you're using. Like maybe they know you use Lambda and S3, so they'll give you the appropriate ones, but they would never give you like for all the buckets. It would be tied to specific ARNs every time.
Right.
I don't know if that's you.
Yeah, that's a good answer, right? So it's like, all right, when they give permission to something like this, they're not having that policy that says resource star, right? They're specifying the list of buckets or that you can access. Right, and that's probably for your own good as well. Like you don't want, if something happens in one of those files or something, gets revealed, like you don't want to be one of the people that gets questioned, or even if it was, generally this stuff doesn't happen on purpose. It's just carelessness or whatever. So it's good just to only have access to what you need.
And the naming convention really mattered for my agency, where we have to have a 4-letter code at the beginning of everything we create. And then when they give us access, they just give us access to like that code, because there's a lot of different projects at my organization. So that was the way that they managed it.
Yeah. Like in IAM, so you can see, like, here's the different policies. And you can create custom policies, which is what we'll do. So a user, you can attach policies to a user, right? So when you, I guess, give access to the policies, I guess what you're saying is, you see here, it's like the resource, these different colons, it's kind of like a file system. So if we say, hey, you have access to all the 4 digits under this directory, you're basically giving access to like S3 buckets. In this case, I guess maybe this is a better example, like S3 buckets under this folder, right? That's what, you'll get access to if you're part of a certain team. All right. Well, that was a start.